Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a look at some additional background information to help us fully understand cellular respiration. Now in the last video we took a look at the structure of the mitochondria and we also wrote down our equations. So you have a paper that was folded and looks like this. So we drew our mitochondria and we have our equations down here. Now we're going to open it up and we're going to take notes on the top section up here, and then down here is going to be reserved for drawing a drawing that's going to help us understand the steps of cellular respiration. So let's go ahead and get started. So, first thing is going to be taking a look at where the energy is coming from in cellular respiration. If you look back at your equation, it's very obvious. So, what is the source of our chemical energy? The energy comes from the macromolecules that we eat. We know that macromolecules can be used to build structures for our cells, but we also learned that there's energy there as well. So catabolism, the breaking down of molecules, is going to provide raw materials in order to build cell structures, but it's also going to provide energy in the form of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Now, if you remember, our cells actually prefer carbohydrates as its main source of energy, but it can use lipids and it can use proteins as well. So how do we get the energy from these macromolecules? It comes down to redox reactions. So redox reactions are going to be used in order to pass energy during cellular respiration. Some key ideas to remember for redox reactions. First is oil rig. So with oil rig, oxidation is losing electrons, while reduction is gaining electrons. So we're going to have a series of reactions in which some molecules will lose electrons and others will gain electrons. If they have lost them, they've become oxidized. If they have gained them, they have gone through reduction. They have been reduced. During redox reactions, electrons will move from one molecule to the next. The electrons will usually move as part of hydrogen atoms. The electrons themselves usually can't just move through the cell on their own, so they're usually attached to hydrogens. So in order to follow what's being oxidized and what's being reduced, you have to follow where the hydrogen atoms are going. So if you move a hydrogen, you're moving electrons, which then you're moving energy. The exception to electrons being moved around on hydrogen atoms is when electron transport chains are used. When electron transport chains are used, they use electron carriers in order to pass the electrons from one molecule to the next. And what you'll see in electron transport chains is that the electron carriers are increasingly more electronegative. They have higher affinities for electrons as you go down an electron transport chain. A very, very important molecule or atom that is involved in the electron transport chain in cellular respiration is going to be oxygen. So when you're talking about biology, oxygen is one of the most electronegative atoms that you can get. And if you think about our equation, in order for cellular respiration to occur, you need glucose and you need oxygen. So it's going to be involved in our electron transport chain as being an extremely electronegative atom. The last bit of information that's important for understanding cellular respiration will be the electron carriers involved. So cellular respiration has two electron carriers. It has NAD+. This should look familiar to you. We saw this in cellular respiration, but it wasn't NAD+, it was NADP+. So they are very similar electron carriers with the slight difference of the phosphate group. So NAD+, when it picks up energy, it's going to become NADH. You gotta be careful there, I almost said pH, so it's going to become NADH. Remember what we just said, moving around hydrogens means you're moving around electrons, which means you're moving around energy. So here, NAD+ will become NADH. When it gives up its energy, when it gets oxidized, it'll come back to NAD+ again. So once again, NAD plus, when it adds hydrogens on, it becomes reduced, becomes NADH. When it loses hydrogens, it gets oxidized, becomes NAD plus again. So not carrying lots of energy, carrying energy. The second one is going to be FAD plus 2. Okay? So this electron carrier, when it picks up energy, when it becomes reduced, will become FADH2. And when it becomes oxidized and releases energy, it'll go back to FAD2+. Okay. So that's the important information that you need to know in order to fully understand cellular respiration. Now let's go to the bottom portion of your page here, and we are going to draw a diagram to help us understand these steps of cellular respiration. So on that bottom portion of your page, we're going to draw a simplified mitochondria once again. Leave some space off to the left here, because that's where our first step is going to go. So we're going to draw our mitochondria, our bean-shaped mitochondria here. Okay. And we're going to draw our inner matrix. I'm sorry, our inner membrane. So that way we can have our matrix there. Okay, so there's our inner membrane with the cristae, and then this would be the matrix here. So the first step of cellular respiration actually does not happen inside the mitochondria. The very first step of cellular respiration happens just outside of the mitochondria, and that first step is glycolysis. Now, its name is actually very useful in helping us understand what's happening. Glycolysis is basically telling us that our glucose, lysis is to break apart, so our glucose will be broken apart. So our very first step of cellular respiration happens out here. I'm going to put a box around it like this. Okay. So that's our first step of cellular respiration right there. The second step is going to happen inside the mitochondria here, and it's going to be pyruvate. So pyruvate oxidation. And it'll happen inside the matrix of the mitochondria. Put a box around that there. Third will be the citric acid. / Krebs cycle. So this step can be either called the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. That will also happen inside the matrix here. And then finally, the last step, I'm going to kind of have it overlap over the inner membrane like this, because the inner membrane is actually involved. It's a very, very important part of this last step. This last step is called oxidative phosphorylation. And it has two parts to it. The first part is an electron transport chain, and the second part is chemiosmosis. Okay, so that'll be our last step. And again, it's overlapping over the inner membrane here, because that's going to be used for the electron transport chain and also chemiosmosis. If we when we take a closer look at these steps as we go through the details in our lessons, we're going to see that glycolysis is going to get us 2 ATP. The citric acid or Krebs cycle is going to get us 2 ATP. But where we're going to get the most ATP from is actually going to be the final step, the last step. That's going to get us approximately 36 ATP under really good conditions. Most of the time it won't get to 36, but that's where we'll get most of our ATP. Oh, sorry, not 36, 34. Sorry, 34 ATP. So if you think about the equation that we first wrote down, we could see 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. So as I said before, under ideal conditions, we can get approximately 38 ATP out of cellular respiration.